Our headline stories this hour. The U.S. Air Force admits that September's deadly coalition strikes against Syrian forces were a mistake and that they would have continued for longer if the Russian military had not flagged it up. Saudi Arabia faces a tough task convincing fellow OPEC members Iran and Iraq to cut oil production in order to prop up its ailing economy. As the cartel meets in Vienna, we'll keep you updated on all the developments throughout Wednesday. We go to our correspondent in a matter of minutes. And a leading dictionary says the word of the year is paranoid after a spike in searches for it during 2016. We look at the trends that have been seen trust drop in institutions which people used to feel kept them safe. From Moscow to the world, this is RT International. My name's Ewan O'Neill. Good to have your company. Our top story this hour, the U.S. Air Force says coalition planes accidentally targeted the Syrian city and the Syrian army in the city of Deir ez-Zor, and strikes would have continued if not for a call from the Russian military. That is the result of an investigation into the incident which occurred in September.
The strikes were conducted under a good faith belief that the strikes were targeting ISIL in accordance with the law of armed conflict.
The U.S. CENTCOM investigator said he found there was no intent to target Syrian forces. He said the U.S. military believed they were targeting ISIL. He said it was an unintentional, regrettable error. The investigator also came to the conclusion that the U.S. forces have not violated the laws of armed conflict. From the way CENTCOM presented this, prosecution seems very unlikely. We've seen this happen before when the Pentagon investigates a strike that went terribly wrong, like the bombing of the hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, decides it was unintentional and therefore not a crime. The U.S. airstrikes on September 17th in Deir ez-Zor, Syria, killed over 60 members of the Syrian military. It reportedly allowed ISIL to make advances in the area. They then had to be pushed back. Other details came up during the CENTCOM investigators' briefing. The U.S. CENTCOM investigator said that the strikes would have lasted longer and would have killed more people had there been no hotline contact between Russia and the U.S. on Syria. That hotline was established as part of efforts to prevent an accidental clash between Russian and American forces. Here's what I found striking in the CENTCOM investigators' report. There was an officially designated point of contact for the hotline. When Russia called to say that the coalition was hitting the wrong people, that hotline point of contact on the U.S. side was unavailable for 27 minutes. This is, mind you, a hotline between two major military powers established to avoid accidents. You would think every second would count. What the CENTCOM investigation also revealed was that the U.S. military called Russia in advance to notify of airstrikes in the area, but gave the wrong location. The investigator said 9 kilometers south of Deir ez-Zor. According to the CENTCOM, this was the first time the U.S. had notified Russia of its airstrikes in Syria in advance. But as we now find out, the wrong location was given in that notification. Many errors were apparently made that night on September 11th and throughout the days leading up to the strikes.
Russians, for some time now, have been asking the United States to give pre-planned coordinates of where they plan to strike. And unfortunately, the United States has turned them down each time. And in this case, they gave the wrong coordinates. And I'm a little concerned as to where they got the coordinates from, because even though the report remains classified, I would suspect, and again, this is just my opinion, that the classified portion of that report basically was telling them that the information came from someone from one of the various groups the United States has been supporting, and took it at face value. And one of those groups clearly has it out against the government and may have purposely given those coordinates.
However, it seems despite the miscommunication and lethal consequences, working with Russia is not on the Pentagon's mind.
Will the United States consider cooperating with Russia to validate targets on the ground in the future?
We have no plans at this point to cooperate with Russia in that way.
To another big story of the day, ministers from the oil-producing cartel OPEC are holding another crucial meeting in Vienna to discuss whether or not to cut output. And leading members, Saudi Arabia, may struggle to convince certain key nations to reduce production.
OPEC, the organization of the petroleum exporting countries, oversees a third of global oil production, and understandably, everyone wants a bite. These days, there's a life and death battle going on behind the scenes. It's waged between the de facto OPEC leader, Saudi Arabia, and two resurgent members, Iran and Iraq, both hungry for a slice of the cake. Saudi Arabia is heavily dependent on oil revenue and needs prices up and production cut. But Iraq says it needs more money to fight insurgents and ISIL, and will only sign up for a production freeze at best and not a cut. Iran, Saudi Arabia's geopolitical rival, wants to pump and then pump some more. Tehran has just returned to the oil market and wants pre-sanction levels of production. The revival of Iran's lost share in the oil market is the national will and demand of the Iranian people. Those words from the country's oil minister. So what's Saudi Arabia's response? Well, it's threatened to walk out of the deal, falling back on the old argument that the market will balance itself out. Some call it a bluff, but one thing is for certain: Iran and Iraq have little to lose.
Well, RT's Igor Piskunov is outside OPEC headquarters in Vienna right now, where oil ministers are arriving for the pivotal gathering. We cross live to Igor. Igor, so we have really the eyes of the financial world where you are right now, and it seems to be focusing on Saudi Arabia, who have a major challenge ahead today, don't they?
Well, definitely, there's a lot of attention being focused at this meeting taking place in that building behind me. That's OPEC's main headquarters here in Vienna. You can see that line of people at the entrance there. Those are all journalists, because there's a lot of hype around this meeting. There are a lot of expectations for OPEC to finally be able to reach an agreement on production levels. However, many are linking this year's rise and fall of oil prices to OPEC's previous promises and then failure to reach consensus. So far, during previous meetings, they've only been able to agree on freezing production, but not reducing it. Now, there's also the issue of how other players on the market will be reacting, non-OPEC members, such as the United States, for instance. And President-elect Donald Trump said he may be looking at easing regulation for American oil producers to be able to produce more, so that could bring more oil onto the market. That could affect the price. And then there's also the issue of how Russia will react and how Russia will act, because so far Moscow only agreed to freeze production, it seems, and it's a question if they'll be able to reduce, or will they'll be able to agree to reduce production. So there are a lot of variables in this equation. Of course, we'll be closely watching this meeting taking place here in Vienna, and we'll be reporting all the latest details.
Yes, so many questions, not least how you're going to get to the top of that queue and get in time to see all what's happening. An important day. Igor Piskunov outside OPEC HQ in Vienna. Thank you. Well, we discussed the chances of OPEC members reaching a deal today with international oil economist Dr. Mamdouh Salameh. This is what he thinks.
There is a very good chance, I would say just over 50%, that they will reach an agreement for two reasons. The first is that members of OPEC are suffering, their economies are suffering very badly. And the second thing is that OPEC has to prove that it has still some influence in the international oil market. The world is focusing its attention on OPEC, and OPEC has to deliver. Otherwise, it will become, as I said many times, a non-entity in the global oil market. It will lose a lot of influence, and if they fail to agree, it will become more difficult to agree in another meeting.
Well, on a different topic, Saudi Arabia is using one of its terrorist rehab centers to recruit and train jihadists. That is according to testimony from a prisoner at Guantanamo Bay. A former al-Qaeda member of Saudi origin, he made the claim to the prison's parole board when explaining his refusal to enroll in Riyadh's de-radicalization program. Now, the center is named after the Saudi crown prince and is meant to help former jihadists abandon their ruthless tendencies in a resort-style setting with pools and palm trees galore. Dozens of Guantanamo detainees have been enrolled in the program. They are provided with private apartments and gourmet meals at the center. And they can enjoy activities such as volleyball, table tennis or art therapy. But often, the Guantanamo inmate has said, prisoners are actually recruited and sent to fight against Shiite groups in neighboring Yemen and Syria.
There is externally a strong de-radicalization program. But make no mistake, underneath there is a hidden radicalization program. It's well hidden, way stronger in magnitude, broader in financing, and in all that. When they release you, they want to make sure that they've got you to fight their jihad in their regions and in the US. They need a jihadist, but they want you to be a compliant terrorist.
Well, the Rehabilitation Center, for its part, admits that 1 in 5 of its graduates returns to extremist activities. But according to the Saudi Interior Ministry, there is an aftercare program to help them achieve complete reintegration into society. Well, we spoke to Michael Springman. He's the former head of the American Visa Bureau in Saudi Arabia. He believes that the program is just a ploy to keep Washington calm.
You don't change somebody's mindset from being a mass murderer by having him play ping pong. I think that this whole thing is just absolute nonsense. And the Saudis are doing this to give the impression that they are doing something, which is always good for the American mind. And the fact that they're engaged in terrorism around the world, whether it's in Syria or in Libya, or in what used to be Yugoslavia, it's the same thing. Who's going to check? Who's going to come from the United States to go over there? Who in the United States is fluent in Arabic? Who can talk to the right people in there? For the ordinary Foreign Service officer, of which there were damn few, you never got to deal with anybody in any position in the Saudi government.
A leading dictionary has named its word of the year, and unsurprisingly, it's not happiness or optimism. Find out what it is right after this.
Well, they're the war hawks selling you on the idea that dropping bombs brings peace, to the chicken hawks forcing you to fight in the battles that they start.
The news hawks try to tell you that celebrity gossip and tabloid murder trials are the most important news of the day.
While the hawks of advertising tell you that you are not cool enough unless you buy their product.
Watching the hawks. Watching the hawks. These are the hawks that we, along with our audience, will be watching.
When lawmakers manufacture consent instead of public wealth. When the ruling classes protect only themselves. When the financial merry-go-round lifts only the 1% up. It's time to ignore middle-of-the-road signals. Going underground, bringing real news to Britain and the world.
You're welcome back. Now, few would doubt that 2016 has been a roller coaster year that's seen seismic shake-ups in global politics that defied expectations. And it's reflected in the language that we've been using this year, as Caleb Maupin reports.
The Cambridge English Language Dictionary has selected its word of the year for 2016. The word is paranoid. The definition? Feeling extremely nervous or worried because you believe that others do not like you and are actively trying to harm you. Well, it's safe to say we live in rather paranoid times. Mainstream media and politicians are constantly hyping up threats that turn out to be non-existent. Since Trump's victory, the U.S. has been overwhelmed with insecurity. There's been talk of mass violence, deportations, world war, and even nuclear weapons going off. as the word fear apparently becomes the favorite reaction of the U.S. media. And over in Europe, Trump's victory means politicians are hitting the panic button when it comes to Russian policy.
We've never been able to understand exactly why he was so much in love with Vladimir Putin.
Russia is really a threat for whole security in Europe, and it's manipulating. It's manipulating also with elections in different countries.
Remember how Angela Merkel talked about Russia hacking the U.S. elections?
We are already, even now, having to deal with information out of Russia, or with internet attacks that are of Russian origin, or with news which shows false information. So it may be that this could also play a role during the election campaign.
While no evidence was provided for an intricate Russian computer plot, it sure stirred up a frenzy. Now Berlin is predicting its elections next year will be targeted by hackers, with a number of polls suggesting that these fears could see 20% of eligible voters abstaining. In Europe, the Brexit vote, along with the rise of some opposition parties, has stoked up fears for minority groups over nationalism.
Is this a fluke or the taste of things to come? Are politics changed for good in the U.S. and in Europe?
The return of nationalism, the rise in populism. It's not just another crisis, it's the crisis.
Faced with this new reality, where cultures clash, it's inevitable that some will seek a comfort in nationalism or tribe or ethnicity or sect.
There's been paranoia over misinformation or mysterious fake news.
Fake news has become increasingly, maddeningly, disturbingly popular, especially on Facebook.
The Pope endorsing Trump? Fake. Megyn Kelly fired for backing Hillary Clinton? Fake. Clinton linked to crimes committed by Anthony Weiner? Also fake. Some of these pro-Trump websites in particular actually come from kids, from teenagers living in Macedonia.
Websites that are critical of American policies are being unconditionally branded as fake news, a tactic that has led to some flashbacks of the McCarthy-era witch hunting during the Cold War. Yes, paranoia is a word that certainly captures the spirit of the times. But the folks at Cambridge Dictionary also tell us that one of the most commonly searched words in 2016 was adorable. So perhaps Western audiences should try to forget everything I just said, and for the sake of holding society together, try to focus on this kitten. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
Britain's relationship with Russia has been the focus of a Westminster Foreign Affairs Committee session. It comes just over a week after a report was presented to the UK Parliament which called for public figures with pro-Russian views to be singled out and discredited. Among those who spoke to the panel were representatives from RT and Russia's Sputnik news agency.
A lot of people actually...
Very grateful for you coming. What would you describe as your values and your founding principles?
Our role is to tell the news as we see it, and often to give space to overlooked stories and alternative perspectives.
I know that I and others who have appeared on RT, we have, the other day I was called by an American neocon think tank a Trojan horse for the Kremlin, or a Putin apologist because I've dared appear on your show. I see that as an attack on freedom of speech. What interference, if any, would you get from Moscow or Moscow politicians?
None.
None.
A non-legislative resolution was also adopted by the EU Parliament last week. It puts Russia and ISIL on the same level in terms of perceived informational threats. We spoke to Peter Truscott, who was present at Tuesday's meeting about the inquiry.
I know that this report they've been working on for almost a year, and they've been gathering in evidence from various experts, and their idea is to examine UK-Russian relations. I didn't agree with the resolution of the European Parliament. I think that it's very harmful to attack different branches of the media just because you disagree with them. I think one of the the beauties of the West, if you like, is that we have a pluralism of media. People can watch whichever media they like, and they can judge whether to watch one media or another. And I don't think it's really for the European Parliament or anyone else to say that we don't like the media content of one particular television channel or radio channel, and therefore it should be banned or discouraged.
Now, for a clear snapshot of what Europe's refugee crisis is really like, the Greek island of Chios offers a sobering vista. Tensions are escalating between migrants stuck there, far-right groups and locals. And everyone is paying a heavy price, as William Whiteman now reports.
In many ways, the situation on the Greek island of Chios can be seen as the embodiment of the refugee crisis. Security in this camp had to be stepped up. This follows a rise in criminality carried out by some individuals among the refugee community.
Refugees go out, they steal things from get inside the houses, they steal some food from the fields, so they don't feel all right.
More worrying still, members of far-right Greek political group Golden Dawn have started carrying out attacks on the camp. In this footage here, a refugee tent burns after a Molotov cocktail attack.
So we're now on top of the wall. This is where the Golden Dawn members are said to have thrown the stones and reportedly Molotov cocktails from. If you look just down beneath us, you can see the camp. We're inside one of the tents now. You can see the damage that these stones that the Golden Dawn drew have made. Here, look, see where it's impacted.
As more and more migrants arrive on the island, tensions continue to rise.
EU closed the borders, and this is the big problem. And these people, they are in jail in our islands if they don't have the food that they need, enough food, or school, or education, or they have health problems. It is normal to go against the law.
Lengthy EU asylum processing times are only serving to exacerbate frustrations, both among the refugees and locals.
Every 3 years problem.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm very tired here, I'm very crazy here. No interview, no very bad.
It looks like they want the refugees to be stuck on the islands so they can send a message to Turkey. Don't come because you get stuck on the island.
With limited help from the EU, the island, and indeed Greece itself, are facing difficulties.
We are a small country in crisis, yes. We want more policemen. We want more doctors.
If something isn't done soon, there are fears that EU inaction could lead to even more violence here.
European people globally, they don't stand up, then we will have this problem again and again. And for us, who are living in the borders, is the problem that maybe in the future will be our turn.
From the Greek island of Chios, William Whiteman, RT.
Tens of thousands gathered earlier on Revolution Square in Cuba's capital to commemorate Fidel Castro. He'd led the country for decades after heading a communist revolution on America's doorstep. Maria Fanoshna reports for us now from Havana.
Of the massive gathering here in the center of Havana, Cuba, at the Revolution Square, where people, many people, as you can see, have come for Fidel Castro memorial service. Wednesday morning, the ashes of Fidel Castro will start traveling to the east of the island, making several stops in different towns here in Cuba, so that people all across the country could come and pay the last respects to El Comandante.
We have to thank Fidel for everything we have. We need to pay him a tribute, because thanks to him, we became who we are now. Fidel gave us education. He helped us. He always worried about the fate of the people and the whole world. My heart aches. I don't know why, but I never thought this day would come in my lifetime.
The reason why I'm here is because he has been our guide for all our lives.
We brought our child with us because eventually, when he's able to understand, we will explain him how important Fidel was for Cuba and the whole world.
Well, clearly some heartfelt tributes there, and even though thousands joined that rally to commemorate a man they consider to be their liberator, a lot of Western coverage of Fidel Castro's death and legacy was still dominated by barbed language. RT's In the Now gets onto that.
Fidel Castro got one hell of a going-away party.
Evil, murderous dictator who inflicted misery and suffering on his people.
Many Cuban exiles celebrating in the streets of Miami.
He ruled with an iron fist, didn't he?
You would think now that he's dead, the rhetoric would rest in peace too. Nuh-uh.
The most popular newspaper in South America, Diario Las Americas, it says Nunca Más with a profile shadow of Fidel Castro. Nevermore, the death of a dictator.
Don't people see that if America or the media tell us to hate someone, especially when it's for almost 60 years, then we should probably stop and ask why. Castro was loathed by millions, but we barely hear about the millions and millions who loved him, and why.
The older generation tend to see him as a hero of the revolution. They're aware that many of them wouldn't even be here if it wouldn't have been for the health advances and the sort of equalisation of resources that he provided. It's mostly, I think, the newer generation who were born under the special period when it was chronically poor with the embargo, Soviet withdrawal of funds, and some of them blame Fidel Castro for the hardships they went through, but some of them blame the US embargo.
Most Americans will never know that. Castro was and will be a dictator. America won this battle, at least at home.
Going beyond the headlines, going underground is next on RT International, but on air in Britain and Ireland, we continue the story of a man who lost everything in the financial crisis and returned to his home village in a search for answers.